Hello everybody, this is Brian O'Haron. This is our fourth program in this series. You run up till near the election time. And I want to say one thing here tonight, besides that NASA experience you saw up there on the screen a few minutes ago. I also had a company with a few other investors in San Diego, California, that produced water quality monitoring equipment used all over the world by oceanographers, Scripps Institute, and Jacques Cousteau. I used to have a picture of him on Sea Technology magazine using our equipment, but I couldn't find it today to put up. If I find it, I'll put it up next week. But that's going to be kind of important for you to remember tonight as I go through this program. Now, I've been asked by a lot of people why I say that it's going to be 15 to 20 years to recover financially for the town. I have a slide for that. Why, Brian, is it going to take 15 or 20 years to recover financially, as you said in one of your previous programs? I'm going to try to answer that question tonight. The other question I get from everybody on the next slide is, why are the cash flow and the money missing problems a small part of the town financial problem? Now, there's been a little less talk about that recently. I saw a little article in the paper, if the town manager was quoted properly yesterday, that said he now says, yes, there were other things involved in this whole thing. We have a bigger problem than just the cash flow problem in Winsted. And he listed several things. One of which he didn't talk about was additional profitable recurring revenue, which I take issue with that. On the next slide, you'll see some of my reasoning behind that. 10 years ago, we, Winsted, were growth orientated. We had a town manager rather, Ms. Johnson, that was very, very growth orientated, and we had Ray Carpentino in the planning and zoning job, and he was very growth orientated. So they were very growth orientated people. I don't even know what party that she was in. The town manager at the time she was just leaving when I retired. But I did see her at meetings trying to help people get onto our tax rolls in this town, and it was quite challenging for her, and she didn't always win all the cases. And of course, Ray Carpentino was wonderful. He was very positive. He helped everybody with everything. And then we changed the mayor. We changed the P&Z leadership from Tony Canavo to George Clausen, and the town planner job was changed. The town planner resigned for one reason or another, Ray Carpentino, and they put in another town planner there. He was also very positive about getting things done, but as I understand, it was very difficult for him to get anything done with the mayor at the time and the P&Z leadership. I don't know all the details, but he ended up resigning after a couple of years, and then we, of course, without a town planner for a while. The town manager is the acting town manager, is the acting now town planner. Before that, it was Scott Eisenlohr, did a very good job as well, but for some political reasons, which I'll talk a bit about tonight, he's only working 15 hours a week now. So we began to pack commissions and committees with non-revenue growth orientated residents. Next slide. The greatest recession since the Great Depression happened in '08 or so. We had major business losses. We had a change in leadership to growth adverse residents. And in the next slide, expenses increased as we get normal, union negotiations and all that kind of thing. We get increased expenses, and we get increased benefit costs and this and that. There has been, over the last 10 years or so, no growth in a profitable recurring revenue. So the taxpayers get to pick up the bills for everything, and that's one of the reasons why they vote zero so often, or close to zero so often. They know that we're not running this town in a responsible, balanced manner, and as a result, they vote no, and they're encouraged to vote no when the town can't justify a lot of the things that it's doing in a balanced manner. The lack of leadership accountability for day-to-day operations. We've been talking about that on this program and other programs, and all the newspapers have it. People all over the world read the internet and see that, etc. I could go on and on about this, but basically we've transcended from a growth-orientated management team to a restricted growth management team. So we are broke. We're broke now. I showed you the piggy banks. We talked a bit about it. So if you look at the next slide up here, you'll see that the reason for this, in my view, this is Brian's view, a lot of people argue with me, George and Candy will say no, 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 and you know, the liberals in the Democratic Party that's in power now will say no, 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 but the environmental extremists in the leadership majority are, next slide, killing the town financially. They're killing the town financially because they think of their views of saving the environment before the views of balancing the budget properly. So where we can get revenue, it's very difficult. People are given a hard time. They don't come into town. They take their jobs elsewhere. They take their revenue elsewhere. And we end up in the back seat. And that's what we are, the taxpayers. Now, remember, I'm unaffiliated. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican or an independent party person. I am an affiliated, and I try to go by the town needs as my first priority, and then try to pick people to vote for that will help fulfill those town needs. And the major town need is not the environmental aspect of the town. That's a very important one. It must be balanced, but we have to balance these things. So on the next slide, for many years, they have their misguided supporters. Their misguided supporters have been making it very difficult to grow the additional recurring tax revenue. Now, I also want to point out here that when I did my 2006 Green Papers, I did say in there that any money that we get in from additional recurring profitable tax revenue from developments or from new businesses coming to town or from large houses with no children, that kind of thing, we should put, at least for the capital projects, we should put money in sinking funds. Of course, they didn't put any money in sinking funds, and probably the reason for that is because the liberal Democrats at the time, and maybe even some of the liberal Republicans, for all I know, they don't like sinking funds because sinking funds tie the money to a project, like buying a new fire truck, buying a new police car, et cetera, getting a road fixed, all that kind of thing. And they don't like to be pinned down, which is not very good from a financial perspective. So for many years, they and their misguided supporters have been making it very difficult. Next slide, if not impossible. And so far, the biggest problem we have in our town, biggest problem is we haven't grown the additional profitable recurring tax revenue, and we haven't balanced our budget between costs and revenue over many years. The costs keep going up, and the revenue stays the same or goes down. Now, there are comments that have been made on TV by people in power that say, oh, the revenue is pretty much the same, blah, blah, blah. But it isn't the same if you're adding in there non-recurring profitable revenue. For example, this year we're throwing in $600,000 from the insurance company. That won't be coming in next year. We have a lot of opportunities when we get this money that's not recurring in, and we build it into our budget, and then the next year we have to charge the taxpayers or cut other parts of the budget to be able to get that $600,000 spent wisely. Next slide. To increase our additional profitable recurring tax revenue has been very difficult. It's been impossible. We haven't done it. You might find a little blip here or two, but if you study the details, as any MBA would, then you'll find that we haven't grown at all. We're one of the worst in the country. Now, the availability of water made this town. This town was made first, of course, by the farmers that came in and the miners that came in Winchester to mine the ground there, and then later by all the factories. And the only reason they came here, one of the main reasons they came here, was because of the water in the town. They could drive their factories, and of course, sooner or later, we didn't need the water anymore to drive the factories, and we had to come up. A lot of people left, the factories left, or they were forced out of town one way or another, and when they were here, though, they did a lot for the town. A lot of people think they didn't do enough for the town, you know. But, you know, jobs are important. You got to have jobs. And for people who say first get the schools right, and you then get people in. I kind of say just the opposite. Let's get in the factories, let's get into developments, let's get the tax money, additional recurring profitable tax money, and then we can clean up our schools. Now, we should be balancing the two, and we should be trying to do the best for the schools that we can afford all the time. Nobody would argue with that. Next slide. Now, the small number of environmental extremists, led by a small number of misguided residents, are killing us financially. They're killing us. You can see that in any paper you want. Get on the website, look up Winstead, read all the articles. If you computer literate, if not, have one of your grandkids do it for you, or your children, or a neighbor, or something. But you know, the whole world sees Winstead now through the eyes of the internet, which I helped to develop when I was president of Internet Corporation. So I know a lot about these things, and I can help you a lot. But if people don't listen, of course, you don't. It doesn't do any good. The leaders. Next slide. The leaders and most of the leaders and most devoted of these misguided extremists are. I'm going to tell you who they are, who's leading this. And I've been saying it all along. I've always been treated fairly in my own personal permit applications from George Clausen when he was in planning and zoning, and not very respectfully treated by Perez when she was in the wetlands, and now, of course, as a select person. Very, very difficult person to deal with because she's an environmental extremist. And to her, facts don't always matter. She doesn't always have the scientific facts. When I first came to town, she didn't know I used to run a company that produced for 7 years and owned part of a company that produced scientific water monitoring equipment for the world. And I knew a lot more about it than she did. And whenever I asked a question, I always got an answer. Cement's bad for the lake, or if you dig a hole in the lake, then all the little critters will be in trouble, which is a lot of this kind of stuff is just used because basically they don't want any more development in the watershed area for a lot of reasons, and they use the environment because that taps at everybody's heartstrings. And the two people are most responsible, in my opinion. This is Brian's opinion. A lot of people agree with me. Some of the other people will think the opposite, but Selectman Perez, Democrat, liberal Democrat, I felt like putting an L there, but I didn't, and George Clausen, a liberal Democrat. He used to be a Republican from what I can gather. He switched over to Democrat along the way when the liberal Democrats took over the Democratic Party. And I remember once when I talked to one of the leaders of the Democratic Party at that time, he said to me, well, you know, nobody wants development in their own backyard. And that's kind of what I say. They don't want any development in their own backyard or in the watershed area for a lot of reasons. The main reason is they don't want cars going to the lake and maybe more boats going to the lake, cars driving on the street. Now, on the other hand, they don't mind putting salt on the roads in the wintertime, which is not good for anything, kills trees, gets in the water. They don't mind throwing poison in the lake dicot to kill the milfoil or maim the milfoil, which is even worse because it grows back again. There are a lot of things. They don't mind driving boats on the lake with oil spilling in and things like that. Now, they'll make other arguments for all that kind of thing, but actually some of them even violate the rules when they go in and they get permission because they have control of the commissions and committees and all to do things that perhaps other people can't do. So they're both residents of the Highland Lake District. Now, there are other people involved in this. They're from all over town. If they're in the Farmington Valley Watershed Association or anything like that, or even out in Winchester, they'll also give a little trouble. So while in power, they have stacked and continue to stack the town boards and commissions, and this is one of the main reasons for the 10 or 20 years. The town boards and commission with their non-growth supporters. So they're in control of most of the important town commissions, committees, selectmen, finance board, and the Board of Education. They're in charge of all this, and they've actually allied with the Board of Education because the Board of Education is very liberal and wants more money all the time. And even though it doesn't have very good test scores in the at least K through 6 area. So, and the other ones are marginal. They're in the middle of the state grades. So they got a pretty strong team, and that's how they get elected. They get elected because we, the unaffiliated voters, which are a huge percentage of the voters in this town, and the members of the other parties don't get out and vote against them. So I think we got to pay more attention to that this year. Now, when they appoint people to these commissions and committees, etc., they're from 3 to 5 years. Now, of course, the selectmen and the finance board and the Board of Education are kind of excluded, except Board of Education people are appointed for 4 years. They don't have to run again for office until the 5th year. So we have, and that's done on a rotating basis, so some of them are always in there for a while. So it's 3 to 5 year terms, and then on the Board of Education, 4-year terms. Do not vote for them. My view is you're killing yourself here. You refuse to listen to people who understand these things and what's going on in what I call the hidden agendas. This is the hidden agenda, is to control the development. You see that all the time if you pay attention. There are signs of it everywhere. They have their own view of what the town should look like, and they're not sharing it with you. And even if they did share it with you, they're not producing. They've been in, Perez has been in for 10 years. Before that, she was in the Inland Wetlands Commission trying to scotch things in there. And George was on the Planning and Zoning for many years. Then he became chairman. Then he got fired. Then he got back in again when the town rose up, I think quite unnecessarily, and put him back in again. Then he ran for selectman on the coattails of the publicity, and he got in there. But if you look at their progress over 10 years, and there is no progress. We weren't on the internet 10 years ago with all this bad news as a town. So if you go to the next slide, I once again say we give the new candidates a chance for all the positions on November 5th. And these new candidates, they all vary background. They're from the Independent Party, they're from the Democratic Party, well, a couple of them, and they're from the Republican Party, all candidates there. And my view is that they're all bright people. I watch them on TV. I talk to them when I see them in person. They all got pretty good ideas. They all well educated. They understand math and bookkeeping, and they can rise to things. But I think the best thing you will get from these people that have never been in office before is they'll listen to people. If I got together 5 MBAs, a couple from the Democratic Party, a couple from the Republican Party, a couple from the Independent Party, and a couple from anywhere else, the unaffiliateds and all, they'd all listen. That's what we want them to do, listen. These people, the liberal Democrats that are the extremists, environmental extremists, and to a certain extent the school extremists, they won't listen to anybody. I've written letters to them, they've never written anything back. Especially the people that are on the school board, in the school board area. So we've got a real problem there. We need to give these new candidates a chance for all positions. Now I hope in the next program, you never know what's going to happen. In the last week or so, not much has happened. Status quo. We're still trying to see if we can get government money early, a little earlier. And we're trying to see if we can get any other way of borrowing from banks or from anybody else. Of course, our Mr. Dix, our financial advisor, said we shouldn't borrow any money. We should do a supplemental tax. So we're still trying to decide on that. A lot of that will happen over the next week or so. There was supposed to be some information in today, Wednesday, some more in Friday, and then they'll have to make a decision Monday night, I guess, at the select meeting, which way they want to get. Now remember, no matter what happens, if you vote these liberal Democrats back in, Perez, Clausen, Renzullo, etc., the existing people, you're going to get a supplemental tax. So they're trying to push this off until after the election. My view is don't vote them in, because you're going to get it. If you don't get it before the election, you'll get it after the election. So realize that, check your piggy banks, and do the right thing. With that, I want to say thank you. I'm going to next week probably talk in more detail about some of the things that are going on with these commissions and committees and boards and things like that if nothing big comes up over the next week. Thank you very much.